So tonight we have two very exciting keynote speakers, Lauren Fraser and Dave Finocchio. These two apply skills gained in their fast-paced sports media careers at the Bleacher Report to new ventures in the climate space right here in Bend. Dave was the founder and longtime CEO of Bleacher Report, and Lauren led sports partnerships at Twitter and later became the COO of CrowdTangle. Welcome, Lauren and Dave.
Hey, everybody. This is the first time we've ever given a co-presentation, so we'll see if it works. I'm Dave. This is Lauren.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for hearing us talk. I started a sports website when I was just graduating from college that I guess changed the trajectory of my life. So we're here to talk about our business journeys and I guess life journeys by default. So I was a second semester senior at Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, and I had a little bit of a life freak out. I had accepted a job with an iBank in New York, and I realized that I actually didn't want to do that job, and instead I wanted to try to start a sports website, which was sort of insane. I was very nervous to talk to my father about that in particular. I sort of had two hypotheses about sports about the online sports market for people who are familiar or interested in it. One was I was a 21-year-old kid at the time on a college campus with a bunch of other kids, and I thought that the sports websites that we were sort of stuck with were out of touch with my generation. So I thought that a different voice would be valued and it's sort of a different style of creating sports content. And then I was also an economics major in college, and I had supply and demand on the brain all the time, and I was taking all sorts of interesting electives. And it seemed to me like when I was reading sports content online, maybe the people who were making those decisions about what to cover were sometimes older and maybe not necessarily using data to figure out what people wanted to read or wanted to watch. At that time, it was especially wanted to read. And it turned out that was wildly correct. Let's say like the older generation of sports editors were using their gut feel to figure out what assignments to give their writers and other content creators. And they were making really inefficient decisions, and as a result, sports fans weren't being served very well. So I got a company off the ground. I basically, when I graduated from college, I put together a PowerPoint presentation, and I sent it to, I think, 8 friends who sort of had their acts together at that point in life. And a couple of my buddies got back to me, and we sort of day by day figured out how to get a company off the ground. And I think we'll talk about where Bleacher Report ended up. It was a wild journey. Today, for years it's been one of the largest sports properties in the United States, and all sorts of crazy stuff happened. But I think as I've reflected on the journey, and I've told the story a number of times, I think for me the most interesting part of the story and why the company was really successful, and for anybody else in the room who is an entrepreneur or who has been or who's been on teams, was really about the team that came together to build the company. And I grew up playing a lot of sports. I was a sports junkie in terms of following sports, also playing sports. I played everything. Sometimes I'd be the bench warmer on the team. Sometimes I'd be the third best player on the team. Sometimes I'd be the star player on the team. I sort of had experience playing a lot of different roles, and I think that for me, that experience playing sports really translated when I was actually figuring out how to lead people, how to hire people, and ultimately trying to steer a lot of people to sort of walk down the same path and walk in the same direction. And so Lauren, who I will just clarify in our experience together, you did not work for me. You worked for one of my other co-founders. So I'll get that out of the way. But you're going to talk a little bit about the team at Bleacher Report.
Yes. So just quick, early in my career, I had, after college, thought I wanted to be a lawyer, went and actually worked for a law firm for a couple of years and decided that was not going to be my future career path. Then was trying to figure out what I was going to do. Ended up going to business school and did my summer internship at ESPN. I was really into sports and had this great experience and was like, okay, this is something I can be, really passionate about. And went to ESPN. And from there was really excited about getting to the West Coast, which, as most of you know, ESPN's in Bristol, Connecticut, where there's not much else going on. So I started looking around for some other sort of like interesting media type companies in San Francisco on the West Coast, and found Bleacher Report, which at the time was a 40-person startup in a one-room office just outside of Soma in San Francisco.
Easily my favorite office of all the offices.
It was a great office. But because I had sort of this experience at ESPN related to the business development that Bleacher Report was trying to do with other local properties, got hired, which is super exciting, and joined the team there. So at the time, I didn't fully appreciate how special Bleacher Report was, but now having worked at 5 other companies since then, I really appreciate how special the experience was and what Dave and his team and co-founders created. But some of the things I just wanted to highlight that I think were really special about that, and I think hopefully a lot of you think about instilling in your businesses, is one, we had very clear goals that everyone in the company was behind. So it was audience growth and revenue, and those, we knew every single milestone we were trying to hit and celebrated every single one of those goals. So in the time that I was there, starting in 2010 to 2012 when the company was acquired, we went from 10 million in audience to 40 million. And every single one of those millions was like, we're ringing the bell, we're going out, we're celebrating it as a team. And same on the revenue side. We had just hired our first head of sales, who is this guy, Josh in New York, very big personality. And so every single time we sold a campaign, the entire company knew what that campaign was, and we were all behind it and working together. So I think really building that camaraderie and figuring out what we were celebrating and what we were so excited about was really important. And I think the other thing to highlight, so I came in business development. I'm trying to work with both, we worked with a lot of local newspapers because it was a great way to grow our audience. With organizations that had really established audiences and SEO, if you're familiar with growing the internet, that was really important at the time, and still is. So built a lot of relationships there and with other sports properties, teams, leagues. And so I would often want to build things and be like, anything the partner wants, I want to build, and have to go to our head of engineering, who would then bring a group together and say, hey, how are we going to prioritize this with our roadmap? And I think one of the things that the team was really good about was figuring out how we align our goals together and really work across the organization to figure out what we were going to prioritize. But everyone felt really invested in all of the other teams and knew what everyone was doing, I think partially because we'd built these great relationships. All right, 2012, the company gets acquired by Turner Broadcasting, which is owned by Time Warner. And I'll turn it back over to Dave.
We sold the company. We sold it for a little over $200 million to Time Warner, which was then later acquired by AT&T, which then sold it to Discover. So the company I built is now it's somewhere. And I talked to a guy today who's the third. I think he's the third longest tenured employee at the company, and he started the year after the company was acquired. So you didn't even overlap with him, which is crazy. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so old if this guy's the third last person standing. The experience as a founder, I think on the other side of an acquisition is unique. A lot of founders have a really hard time after their company's acquired because they, in a lot of situations, they lose control, and when they're used to having a lot of control, and so most leave pretty quickly. I was fortunate, I guess, in a couple senses. One, our company was on fire when we sold. We were doing really, really well, and so the acquirer who had planned to integrate us into what they were doing basically left us alone. And I ended up being there for another mostly 7 years, and they really didn't integrate the company until after I left. So that was, it took a lot of foresight on their end. They were mostly New York, a little bit Atlanta-based organization, and they had enough savvy to look at what Google had done with some acquisitions, where they said, there was one guy in the company in particular who said, you know what? If this is going well, let's just leave it alone. And that really made the experience for me. We ended up becoming a household brand in the sports world. I worked with Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal and Ernie Johnson, and had all sorts of crazy life experiences with different sports people, and just Mark Cuban screaming at me, and Adam Silver telling me his deepest, darkest secrets, and just like all sorts of wild stuff over the years. It was incredible. At the same time, so I left in 2019, and I sort of, I guess just as a human, I'd had this, like for me, Bleacher Report, as much as it's sort of like a silly sports entertainment company, depending on your perspective, but for me, it was a very mission-driven thing. Going back to when I was, a little kid, sports meant the world to me, and I really, at my core, wanted to leave an imprint on that world. By the time I was 35 or so, my learning curve, sort of in sports and in media, wasn't as steep as it used to be, and I'd sort of lost that sense of purpose. I was being asked, we were figuring out sort of what our billion-dollar sports betting strategy was going to be, and I was like, I don't know if I want to spend the next 10 years of my life. I don't have anything against sports betting, by the way, but I didn't necessarily want to spend the next 10 years of my life figuring out how to get 18-year-olds to bet on sports. That's just like not what I wanted to do with my time, and so I started to figure out that I needed to take some time away and sort of figure out what my next mountain to climb would be. And I think that's maybe where the story gets, at least for me, it's more interesting, because thankfully I had a really wonderful partner who sort of ended up guiding me to the next phase of our life. Back to Lauren.
Okay, in the interim, I left Bleacher Report in 2012, shortly after the acquisition, and went over to Twitter, which they were starting to grow their partnerships with sports properties. So worked with leagues and broadcasters on how to build their businesses on Twitter, which was similarly a very exciting time. I went to a lot of great events and had some really exciting life moments, like helping Johnny Manziel's mom in the green room the year that he was drafted, for example, and doing lots of interesting things. But after Twitter, ended up taking a little bit of time off, and then joined CrowdTangle, which at the time was a 10-person startup focused on social analytics. Again, performance on Facebook and Twitter for companies. But I think taking a lot of the experience I had at Bleacher Report to another startup, was CEO of that company, and we had incredible product market fit pretty much from the beginning, which, as many of you know, is incredibly difficult, but we were very lucky, and expanded that business through media and sports organizations. Ended up working with a lot of international, what's the word I'm looking for? NGOs and other groups that were working on reaching communities. But we ended up being acquired by Facebook, and I was there for about 4 years, continuing to work on CrowdTangle while we were at Facebook. So I'm sort of fast forwarding. That's sort of a little bit of the background of this career. But while I was there, we have 2 kids now, but I had my daughter who's now 6, and started to see, very much to the food issue, but we were creating so much waste. And I was really concerned about, we're buying all of these things that I think we don't need. We're trying to pass them on, trying to figure out how we can, do more circular economy, and started to just learn more about climate, and got really, really concerned and worried, and took that into this pretty big networking journey. But met lots of interesting people, got involved in some great groups. If anyone's interested in getting into climate tech, My Climate Journey, on deck are some great organizations. There's a great Women in Climate Tech group also. But got to meet some really interesting founders and think about what space I wanted to get involved in climate. one of the things that I really realized along this journey was that energy is by far the biggest source of where our emissions are coming from. As consumers, I think we often think about what we're wearing or buying as where we think about climate often, but it's all about energy use. And so I got really excited about electrification, which is the idea that we need to transition from fossil fuel appliances and vehicles to clean electric appliances and vehicles that are powered by renewable energy. So got really excited about that concept, ended up going to work for Rewiring America, which is a nonprofit focused on electrification. Did some great work on the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed last year, and really helped work with the private sector there, and companies that were working on electrification, like Mitsubishi and Trane and Carrier and kind of like big HVAC manufacturers to help influence that legislation. So fast forwarding from that experience, got to meet my co-founders who were some other former founders, a really smart group of people that were thinking about how we pull other levers to scale this idea of electrification. And one of the biggest hurdles, even though there's now all of this money that's going to be coming to consumers in the form of tax credits and rebates around implementing clean electric appliances and getting EVs and really thinking about this clean energy transition, people need to know about it. And it's really hard to reach people and reach people at scale and start to think about making these decisions before something breaks and you're in an emergency and you need a water heater tomorrow. And so you just put in another gas water heater, for example. So we built Canopy, which is a platform to help individuals transition from their fossil fuel appliances and really think about decarbonization in their own lives. And so we were working through companies and now starting to work with individuals, but like working through companies to help them work with their employees on this journey of decarbonization. I'm going to turn it over to you because I'm tired of talking, but then I can talk a little bit more.
Fair enough. So we moved here 2 years ago, and before that, we're long-time San Francisco residents. We lived a block from Haight-Ashbury forever, which was its own life journey. But in 2014 to 2016 was sort of the period where we figured out that wildfire and smoke seasons were, which had never been a mainstay in the Bay Area. There was one wildfire season that happened in the early 90s in Oakland, and then sort of never happened, and then all of a sudden started happening every single year. And we started to have kids about the same time period. And Lauren sort of like dragged me along on this journey where she really wanted to learn about sort of the problem side levers around climate, like what actually is driving this, and sort of what it's very complex in a lot of ways and very simple depending on if you look at it other ways. But we wanted to learn about the problem side levers and then the solution side levers, and we started just consuming a lot of content about climate, listening to a podcast called My Climate Journey, where the host would have really cool entrepreneurs come on, and listening to a couple of other podcasts. And I found the world to be, because I'm sort of a content person and I'm decent at figuring out like how to make information connect with big groups of people. At least I can do it online. And the information I was consuming via the podcast was interesting to me. I was learning a lot, but I knew that it had no chance of ever being mainstream and coming across as relatable to like sort of your average American. And I started thinking about like, geez, there's even my friends who, a lot of them went to top colleges and yada yada, like they know nothing about this. They're not educated about these topics at all. When I hear them speak about the topics, I know now that a lot of the information they spew is incorrect, or they don't understand the nuance. And so information and education is a big deal here. And a lot of people, frankly, just like we are, most of us, going to be making transitions, whether we know it or not, to be less wasteful and less polluting people. And a lot of us need guides in order to help us along the way. And that might be help polluting or wasting less. It might be help saving money along the way. It might be help with health benefits. that come from making some of these changes. So anyway, with my content lens on, I thought we need a lot better information about climate and related topics that's a lot more accessible. So I ended up putting together a project team, as I do when I think about projects, and I ended up launching something called the Cool Down, which is now at thecooldown.com. We launched last July, so we've been live for 8 months. Turns out there's a lot of white space in the market. We've already grown to almost 10 million users in 8 months. So by comparison, it took Bleacher Report 5 years to get that big. And basically what we're doing is we are attracting people sort of through what I call top of the funnel, but through sort of like really easily accessible content that relates to a lot of people. And then we're trying to funnel them down into products that are more like how we help you and guide you through your own personal journey. A lot of what we're doing right now is getting people to sign up for newsletters and sort of make climate something that you don't think about as being totally negative and you think about as being an opportunity to, again, improve your family's health, save money, waste less, and in the process, maybe decide to make some bigger changes over time if, again, that's right for you and your family. So if you want to say something else, I'll turn it over to you in a second, but I'll just say that I think we both feel sort of a sense of purpose now, having been, I think, been through different versions of startups at different phases, but have a lot of, even though the climate sort of situation to us is daunting, I think I don't know, say that we're happy working in climate is sort of weird, but I think just like having a strong sense of purpose is something I really value, and I'm really enjoying doing this, and I'm very grateful for sort of the opportunity to do it. So, anything else you want to say?
I think I'm good.
Okay, all right, we're good.
Any questions?
Round of applause. This is really exciting stuff. I loved what you shared. And my first question is to go into what you were just sort of referencing. Like, how are you feeling about climate and where we're going and what we're doing and what's possible? So stobbing.
I think that, I don't know if many of you read this, the IPCC report came out yesterday, the most recent one, and it's pretty daunting, like what we're facing as a global community. But there's so much inspiring work that's happening, and we're both pretty involved in the climate tech community. And there's actually a really great climate tech group that started in Bend, so you should connect with them and get the startup groups going. But there's so much really cool innovation that's happening both on the hard technology side with battery storage and improved solar technology, to really cool seaweed agriculture and new farming practices, and just really great things that are happening. And I think we just need to figure out how to accelerate it even faster.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say I'm a big history geek. Sports and history are my two things, and I think in United States history, we don't have a great track record of doing hard things without true popular support. And I mean, for me, yeah, the technology's there. And if you spend time looking at the technology, the things that are happening in every single industry and every single sector are like pretty incredible. And the people in the spaces are so inspiring. Like it's amazing. But I hope there is more popular support to accelerate some of these transitions that we need to make. On the sooner side, because the faster we accelerate, the better our kids and grandkids' lives are going to be. I'm pretty convinced of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I know I saw some hands going up. Yes, right here.
So my sense is there's a lot of effort going into providing incentives for people to buy electric cars, electrify solar panels, things like that. I feel like it's still tilted where it's hard for people without a lot of money to get into that. Two questions: would you agree with that? And if you do, is that a problem? Is it just like if we electrify more and make more progress, does it matter who is really pulling that in?
Okay, this is an interesting question. He's talking about like the cost to enter into some of these programs. It seems like they're sort of geared towards people who have a higher income. So your thoughts on that, do you agree? And what does it look like sort of as it grows and more people are participating?
It's a great question. So I'd say to date, yes, things have been expensive. There's more of an early adopter, wealthier adopter model. With the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, I'd say there's two things. So one, tax incentives, which will bring down the cost for, I'll call it like more upper middle class citizens or adopters. But with the rebates that are not out yet, but they're going to come to the end of this year, they should fully cover the cost of these appliances and upgrades. So that doesn't go for cars. Cars are still, you get $7,500.
For median income families and down, right?
Yep, 150% of area median income. I have a lot of detail if anyone wants it. So I think the sort of important thing to know is that coming at the end of this year, there will be a lot more incentives for everybody to be able to get involved. And the hope is with like this big infusion of dollars that will help the market. A lot of this is about driving market transition. That then the cost of appliances and installation will start to come down because there's going to be such an upswing in adoption. Again, like needs to be proven, but it's over time that's sort of been the trend. So ideally, that's what happens.
And then it would start to make sense for like landlords to be taking advantage of these programs as well. Right?
Yes, we need all the landlords.
Get all the landlords you know.
Who's a landlord?
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say this IRA money is sort of relative peanuts to what it's actually going to cost to just electrify the United States. But you got to start somewhere, and whether you believe that it should start with the private market or the public market, or the government sort of seeding some funding and pushing some things along, my attitude is generally speaking like we got to get moving, and I think this is worth a try. So.
Yes, Kyle.
So you started your first company when you just getting out of college and the first thing, and now you're kind of an experienced founder. How is this more recent media company easier or harder? Because first, you're young, it's the first one, but it's sports, which is ubiquitous. This one, you're trying to convince people or dive in with something that is important, but a little bit more niche depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, so Kyle wants to know how this experience as a founder compares and contrasts to your first experience, climate versus sports.
Yes. All right, I'll phrase it this way. I did a bunch of investing between when I left Bleacher Report in 2019. I spent a couple of years advising companies, investing with two partners, and there's a lot of investors. Most investors are very, very biased towards backing experienced founders over first-time founders. And I, as somebody who had some success as a first-time founder, I always thought it was sort of ridiculous because I had so much energy. I really had a chip on my shoulder. I worked so hard. I had when Lauren met me, I didn't have anything on my walls in my 400 square foot studio apartment.
He had one fork.
I'm surprised I had one fork. Yeah, I was just all in. It was my life, and I was working with a lot of other people where it was their lives too. And I was like, how as a second-time founder, being sort of being honest with myself, can I ever make up for that? And so I doing this again, I had some self-doubt about it. And then 6 months in, I sort of realized oh my God, there were so many things I did not know how to do the first time that took so much time, and I made so many stupid decisions that I had to learn from, and we hit so many potholes. And now we know what we're doing, and I don't know, as we've started to grow pretty quickly, I kind of have the swag back, and I'm like, I'm not bad at this. So I do think it's different phase of life. My approach is on a daily basis is super, super different, having two kids and being married to before where I would just work all the time. But I do work a lot smarter now, and I'm probably more confident in my decision making because I have a lot of pattern recognition. So when people tell I had a lot of debate with my founders on the first team, and it took us years to sort of iron out those debates. Now I sort of know. So it's nope, we're doing this. So I don't know.
And then topically, climate versus sports, are you finding that I mean, this thing that you've got is
So
growing
climate
so much fast.
So there were a lot of questions about this when I was starting the company, around like, well, climate's pretty niche. Not a lot of people care about climate. One, there are more ways to make climate content relatable. Basically, you trick people into thinking they're not consuming climate content when they are, is one way of putting that bluntly. And then I'm sure this will change, but when we entered the sports space, there was so much competition. There was ESPN was I'm paraphrasing a VC who told us no, one of many VCs who told us no, but he said, hey, like you guys, but you've got a behemoth in your space in ESPN, you've got CBS Sports and Fox Sports and NBC Sports and AOL Sports and Sports Illustrated and on and on and on. And I just, he looked at me and said, I fundamentally don't believe you're going to be big enough to ever matter. Like, you're either in this business, it's a zero-sum game. You're either one of the top three or you're dead. I was like, oh, okay, so we're going to need to get pretty good at audience growth. But it was a very cutthroat business. In climate, we're taking a very data-driven approach. My whole belief is that nobody's really used data to build customer journeys for people in climate based on your belief system, where you live in the country, your behavior. Let's use some data and figure out actually like where you are and how we can move you along to help you and your family. Nobody's done that. And so I think there's a bit of a lack of sophistication in the space so far, relative to sports. So in some sense, it's been easier just because the techniques we've developed over the years just have not been used in this space, versus in sports, everything we did, within 6 to 12 months, our competitors were trying to replicate it over and over again.
I love that.
So my question is, I love the idea of information driven and trying to really educate people, because I think that's the founding thing. But and I guess maybe I'm just as uneducated, but I love the idea of electrifying and saving our climate and all that. But it's always come back to me that where does the electricity come from? It comes from fossil fuels or whatever. So how do you get around that, or what do you have what's your
Yeah, this is a great question. This is a question specific to, if we're going towards electrification of everything, what's the cost of electrification, and is that really the right answer and the right thing to put all of our efforts behind?
It's a great question, and it's the question. So we need to both electrify the supply side and the demand side. So right now in our country, I think 40% of our electricity is clean, coming from solar and wind and clean energy sources, and the other 60% is coming from fossil fuels, coal, natural gas. So we need to move all of that to 100% renewables. There's a lot of work there, but still a lot to go. And right now, the cost of solar and wind is dropping. So in many places, it's actually cheaper than fossil fuels. So it's really about, there's a lot of work at the federal level also, how do we increase transmission and being able to get all of that clean energy on the grid, which there's some really cool companies in Bend that are working on solar and, stuck in this line, trying to get their solar on the grid. So super important is first part. But if we wait till all of that's 100% renewable to then move the demand side, which is all our appliances, then we won't have done the job, because we're still all hooked up to gas. So I think it needs to be done in parallel. And what we recommend through Canopy for anyone that sort of goes through the process is the first thing you do is sign up for clean energy. So through your utility or through community solar, there's amazing community solar programs in Oregon. Get signed up for 100% renewable energy. In most cases, it's actually cheaper than what you're paying with your utility bill right now, especially for community solar. And then start that process of electrification, because you know that what you're doing is clean.
So for a specific example, we looked when we bought a house here 3 years ago. We looked at putting solar panels on the house. Our house doesn't face a great direction. It's a 2-tiered roof. Ran the numbers, wasn't great, and so we decided to wait on that. And instead, Lauren signed us up for community solar. So all of the energy that comes to our house is renewable energy. And then we had some electric appliances before that came with the house, and then we've done some other upgrades. But that's basically been our process of let's attack this side and then the other side. But signing up for community solar is super, super impactful, and it's really easy if you live here, especially.
Oregon shines. I'll just make a plug.
That's great. Kyle.
So I'm not 100% sure, but it kind of looks like, or I guess what's your plan for going global?
What's your plan for going global and moving outside of the U.S.?
For both of us.
Yeah, I mean, just for focusing on, like, obviously, focusing on the U.S. is a big task. I'm not dismissing that.
Big market.
Doing that
Yeah.
is huge, but also, is there a plan, or do you plan on expanding the reach from a media standpoint and the reach from an informational standpoint?
From a media and information standpoint, do you plan on expanding the reach outside the U.S.?
Okay. Yeah, different questions. Probably. I would say maybe someday, but not definitely not on my horizon right now. I think we have years and years of work to do. I did at Bleacher Report, just for context. I guess we got going in 2005. I was doing it full time by 2007. I opened up our London office in 2013. So it was basically 6 or 7 years of jamming on it just in the U.S. before we tried to move outside the U.S. Yeah.
We're very focused on the U.S. market right now, partially because we're lagging Europe and other countries right now, but also because one of the ways that we offer our product and sort of the value proposition is that everything is personalized, which means that we've built models off of U.S. energy data and home emission data so that everything is customized from recommendation and economic recommendation to each individual. So building that out in every country is incredibly complicated. So it's like a maybe if there are other markets that are really important.
Yeah. There was one in the back. Yes.
Yeah, a question. Excuse me, you guys are very informed about all the green stuff, so we appreciate that. But question about the green energy sources. For example, lithium mining and some of the challenges on the green stuff might not be quite as green. In your research, are you finding some alternatives?
Yeah, this is a great question. So this is talking are these solutions always as green as we think they are, specifically lithium batteries and the mining process? What are your thoughts on that? And
You want me to go? I think it's a great question. I think there are, yes, some challenges that have been brought up around lithium. I think there's great technology that at least I've heard the beginnings of coming out of labs that's using other sources of metals and what's the right word I'm looking for? Elements, not necessarily metals, but other elements to create batteries that will not be as extractive as lithium, but they're not ready yet. So I think there is this push-pull with some of the technology. And I think I don't want to speak to it because I'm not an expert in it, but I think there have been some really good analyses of the pros and cons of different parts of these technologies and how it relates to the climate impact and where it is sort of worth mining lithium in the short term while we work on some of these other technologies because the value of switching to electric vehicles is so powerful for the climate.
Yeah, my take is there's certain things that are sort of, to me, more no-brainers, sort of from the standpoint of is this good or not, like switching to renewable energy. If it makes sense for you, I think is a no-brainer for the climate. EVs versus gas cars, you can read plenty of analysis on the internet that'll say that one side is better, the other side is better. My perspective, having done a bunch of research, I think EVs in current form are still better than gas cars, but if you have a gas car, it's still better to probably drive that until you can't drive it anymore. But when you buy your next car, maybe think about getting an EV or at least one EV if you have two cars. And I can talk about why that is if you want. But I think to Lauren's point, we are definitely relying on technologies improving with almost every aspect of this, including solar, over the coming years. I'm pretty confident the technology is going to get a lot better too, because there's an unprecedented amount of money being invested in this space.
I mean, it seems to me like a future with cars in their current form, whether EV or gas, is not even a consideration. I mean, to me, it's only a matter of time before we just can't really justify using single cars anymore. Are people talking about that?
In cities, for sure. I think there's a lot of discussion and some really cool practices in other places in the world, but things that are happening in cities, and we see it here, even here in Bend, but like more biking and more public transportation and really innovative models there that I think is really interesting. In other parts of the country, it's, I think, just not realistic that everyone's going to be able to do that, and you're still going to need personal vehicles in more suburban and rural areas. So it's just a balance, right? But I think in places with higher density, like absolutely, we should be promoting more walkable, bikeable cities as much as possible.
Love me some trains. I'm going to say that. Love me some trains. Okay.
The train to Mount Bachelor.
Yeah, right. Oh, even just like a commuter train around town, like the train to Whole Foods and then back over to the west. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying we could do it. Okay, in the back.
I heard of a concept. I don't know where this is legitimate or way to but 15-minute cities. Have you heard of this environmentally friendly approach?
Okay, she thinks she may have heard of something. She's not sure if it's real. 15-minute cities, it's an environmental approach?
You guys did something on the
We have.
Ooh, this is, wow,
Is
this
it
is getting wild.
Yes, it's a. My understanding right now, we have covered it to an extent. I think it's mostly in concept mode there are some billionaires in our country right now who have like extensive plans to build new cities, and there are parts of other cities that are being in Europe. Like there's an old airport in Berlin, not the main airport, but they're the regional airport that's being transformed into sort of like a 15-minute city. I think there might be this new trend where billionaires who are sort of tired of owning sports teams are like, I've got a sports team, you've got a sports team, but like, do you have a city? Because I have a city. So, we'll see.
Gosh. Kevin.
This is more of an opinion question or kind of
Okay, we have an opinion question coming in. Like it.
or kind of a guess.
Or a guess. Okay.
What do you feel is the time horizon for some of these technological advances to hit the point where we reach saturation with the normal population?
Okay, so
For EVs, household electrification, solar, where it does feel like we're almost there. I've had the same experience of like, do I do this with solar? Do we, it does feel like we're right there with battery tech. There's so much that's right there. What do you see as a time horizon where it becomes more ubiquitous across the entire?
So he wants some your opinions on some time horizons for when these different technologies are sort of reaching critical mass.
My guess, which is as good as your guess or anybody else's in the room, that I think we've been in sort of like, we call it like early adopter mode with all this stuff, like mostly the eco-environmentalist people, and then you've got some other groups of people that have mostly done this because it has not traditionally, like for the last 10 years, been financially in your favor to necessarily do this. In some there's some exceptions to that. That is starting to change. In some cases, it has changed a lot. And so I think my view is we're now entering into this phase where like there's this early majority of people. There's sort of like three phases. They're the early adopters, the early majority, and then there's everybody else. And so I think we're entering into the phase where the early majority of folks, who are a much, much larger group of people than the early adopters, are coming in. I think that's my guess is that's sort of over the next 5 years, like you're going to see a lot of traction with that group and not so much with sort of the everybody else. The unknown is sort of like what happens with extreme weather and whether they're sort of step function changes that are just caused by more and more people sort of being freaked out and saying like, but sometimes markets can move really, really quickly in the space we live in. People make World War II analogies all the time because like a lot of climate people want us like, it's like, okay, it's just like World War II. Everybody's going to mobilize, post Pearl Harbor, let's go. And, I think we live in a pretty individualistic society relative to other capitalist societies like Japan. Like they're more collectivist in terms of sort of looking out and for their neighbors and thinking about a collective sense. The United States is a little bit less like that. And so I think that we're still in the individualistic phase where everybody's sitting around calculating like, all right, environment, but like, I need to make a financially savvy decision for myself. So everybody's sort of in the what's in it for me phase versus like I need to do it for the collective phase. And I think because of advances in technologies and because of pricing likely coming down, I think that gap will shrink.
I'll give you one example. We've had incredible heat waves the past couple of years, and some of our neighbors in the Pacific Northwest don't have AC. So that's a huge opportunity. Instead of installing like a regular AC unit, get a heat pump. It'll cover your heating and cooling. So how do we help shift people to making like the smarter decision when something is happening and there's like, millions of people that all of a sudden need air conditioning that didn't have it before?
Yes, Kevin, you sure can. What is it?
On that note, do you think, again, opinion, it's more the technological advances or a change in people's perception and knowledge of what you guys are
Okay. Do you
that
think?
actually drives that critical
Do you think that it's more perception on the part of the people or the technological advances that really drives this critical mass?
The tech right now is way ahead of where cultural attitudes are. And the tech is still like the pricing right now is way ahead of like if you were making these changes 5 years ago, you were doing it because you were willing to make a sacrifice. You don't really need to make many sacrifices anymore, just on a pound for pound basis for most things. Whether we're talking about product, well, anyway, I won't get into it. But yeah, I think the culture probably and sort of like the element of like this phenomenon we see where if one of your neighbors gets solar panels, you are exponentially more likely to get solar panels. There's a huge sort of keeping up with the Joneses or just the phenomenon or just like you see this thing marketed to you every single day because you just see it. And so you're like, oh, maybe I'll get solar panels. And this isn't super weird. Like they got solar panels. And I think more of that like more and more people who like you see them driving around town with EVs, you see the solar panels, things will start to pick up momentum.
That's great.
And can I just add?
Yeah.
It's all the way up from like consumers, like our workforce, installers, like all the way up. There's a lot of, I'll call it like education and culture shift that ideally will happen in sort of like what's recommended and then what people end up doing.
Yeah, like the contractor trade side of this is a really big deal. We do not have enough electricians in the United States. We don't have enough tradespeople who've been trained to install a lot of these appliances we're talking about. So one of my opinions is like, if you're a kid and you
In the front row.
well, I don't. This like depends what they want to do with their lives. But say you're somebody who's not as interested in going to college to get a liberal arts education or something. You don't want to go into a bunch of debt. Like being an electrician in this country, like you're going to make six figures. You're going to be able to make it quickly. It's going to be a super stable job because like we're going to need like if you're a good electrician, you're going to have a lot of business for a long, long time. So I think just more awareness around like. There are a lot of good, stable careers that are going to come along because of this transition, and like they might involve not having to go into a ton of debt.
I love that. How about for comedians? Okay, we can talk later. I know we had one more in the back. Yeah. Okay, so this will be the last one, and then I have like a mini one. Yes. So how do you measure success, Dave, on your site? What does success look like for you in terms of how you're dealing with your clients or your customers and what you're asking them to do?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Past business, basically, like the businesses are both I call them funnel businesses. Like you try to get people to sort of come in at the top because they consume some content, and then you try to retain them, and that can be following you on social media, or in this case, like we try to get them to sign up for newsletters. at Bleacher Report, things sort of stop there. It's mostly about content consumption. The cool down, the difference is we have a third part of the funnel that we call action. And essentially what we're doing right now is we have a framework where we are testing lots of different behaviors to figure out like we're sort of letting the market dictate what we do more of. And so we have a lot of behaviors around product purchases. We have a database of 4,000 sustainable products, and we are recommending, and we are putting those products in front of our user base to figure out which ones are taking and not. So that's the product piece. We have a whole services layer where we've found that circular economies, like secondhand markets, are really, really popular right now, and not just with Gen Z. Like, a lot of younger people do a lot of clothing shopping in vintage stores, and like that's a much bigger deal in their generation than it was in mine, and probably other people with other people in the room. But I think circular economies are going to really, really pick up steam, and they're like those ecosystems will grow a lot. So that's another area we're pushing people towards. Opportunities like anyway, I know we're running late, so I'll cut it short. Basically, we're trying to test behaviors right now to figure out what's sticky, and like anyone who we get to take any action right now is a win. And then once we get people to take action, then our goal is to sort of help them along their journey to take further action. Sorry, that's not the best answer.
No,
but
any
that's sort of
action is a
Then
win.
we'll
That's
figure out how to monetize it.
Any action is a win. I think
Of
that's
course.
a great takeaway in this specific. Okay, so here's my question: Leonardo DiCaprio, early adopter on the Prius, hurting or helping the client? You know what? Let's not go there. Thank you so much, Dave and Lauren. How about a round of applause? This was fascinating. We could talk all night, clearly. I mean, it's still light out. That was tricky. Okay, so I have a gift for you. This is our tradition. So I have a PubTalk. It's reusable. So you get a big old stein, and we'll fill it with your choice of square baby food the next time you come to PubTalk. And you'll have a balanced nutritional evening. Oh, mic drop. That's exactly how that needs to end. Thank you both so much. Yes, of course.